All right, there looks like there was a short delay on the web, but it should be live. Let me check my microphone. Hi, everybody. If you can hear me, just wave or say hello in the chat. I see Veronica's out there, Robin, Christine, and several others are jumping on. Welcome, everybody. This is Yvonne, and this is episode 4 of the Fruits of the Spirit project. And so I'm going to review a little bit of the stuff we did before, and then I'm going to give you a preview of what's coming next. And I'm actually going to shorten some of the lessons, that way they don't get repetitive, because this is supposed to be a skill builder. And so let's go ahead and get started. So first, let me share my desktop with you. So you should see my computer. There should be a big blue ball. That's what you see there. And I'm going to drag something over. All right, so last time that we were together, I shared with you the no waste method for flying geese, and this one was shared on the website today. If you want a copy of this, if you can't download it for whatever reason, just email me. My name is Yvonne at jellyrollclub.com. That is my email. I'm going to type it in the chat. So if you ever have problems downloading things from my website, don't panic, because my email is literally Yvonne at jellyrollclub.com. And it's super easy to remember. And so there's my email, right? So just Yvonne at jellyrollclub.com. My website is www.jellyrollclub.com. All right, so that last time we were together, I said one of the ways that you can make all of your stars easier is by using the no waste flying geese method instead of doing all the other crazy methods. All right, so one measurement that I want you to remember, and here's the little goose at the bottom of the page, so I updated this. The Fruit of the Spirit project requires one large 7.5-inch square of background and 4 small squares that are 4.25 or 4 1/4. And if you forgot how to make them, there's a link to the video that shows you how to make them, but I'm going to review really quick today. Now, I have a chart on here that you can see. This chart is the exact method. So if you use these measurements to make the flying geese on the left, you're going to have to remember to use a scant 1/4 inch and exact measurement. So you're going to have to really do some 7/8 math and 3/8 math for those. Or you can just round up a little bit and then trim. And so it's up to you how you want to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Last time I finished that star, I'm going to show you what I had. You should have finished that right there, which is the fruit bowl, and we should have worked on the things, the love blocks. So let's recap really quick. All right, so let me scooch this over. So the last time we were together, we made these long strips, and these long strips are 18.5 inches. Just double check my math to make sure I'm correct. But these should be 18.5 inches, and I put one of my strawberries and then the word love on this particular one. And those, I'm going to make 2 of this one. The love stars have a strawberry in the middle, and they measure 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. And then once I sew them into my quilt, they're going to finish 12 by 12. This center finishes to 6 inches. That means that my applique central unit was 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. And so those are the measurements that you have to remember for this project. Today we're going to work on the joy block, and I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of kind of creative piecing to make that watermelon. And then I also have a survey or a question that I'm going to ask everybody. If you are interested in doing a block of the month next year where we do a pillow cover for every month, so this is like a pillow cover, and it's a big applique pillow cover. If you're interested in having me design a pillow cover for every month of the year, we could start that in February with the Valentine one and then work our way through the year if you are interested in making like a 12.5 by 12.5 pillow. So let me know in the chat if you're interested in that, and I'll work on that. But in the meantime, we're going to finish this beautiful quilt that I'm working on called the Fruits of the Spirit. All right, so let's look at what we have here. So I'm going to show you what we have. So you should have traced these letters. If you are using a light box, you can flip it over on its back and you can see it. If you can't see it and you don't have a light box, you can always trace it with a Sharpie, because a Sharpie will bleed right through these. And then when you flip it over, you'll be able to see it without a light box. So if you trace with just a regular Sharpie, that will bleed through the paper and then you should be able to see it. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make this watermelon. And the watermelon, if you notice in this design, has a few strips going this way, and those are colors. So the watermelon is lighter in the middle and it gets darker as it goes out. So what I'm going to do to make my watermelon that way is I'm going to get a jelly roll strip. It's kind of watermelon color. It has strawberries and pomegranates and other fruit on it. And then I'm going to build until it's darker all the way to the outside. And so I have a couple of different colors here, and I'm going to use these colors to work on my watermelon. And I'm just using scraps out of my scrap heap. So I have a couple of different reds that get darker and darker. And so I'm going to use a pink. I save these little 1.5 inch strips. And so you just never know how I'm going to use them. So these are strips from my scrap bin and a leftover piece from last time. And so I'm going to cut, just so you know how big this is 6.5 inches. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half, just like this. And you're going to want to put the pretty sides to the outside. So if you're working with directional fabric or fabric that has a front side and a back side, you're going to want to fold the ugly sides together and the pretty sides to the outside. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, now that I have that crease, I'm going to take one of my strips, and it doesn't matter what strip you use, but let me see. You want your strips to be at least 1.5 inches wide, but they can be a tiny bit wider. And so I'm just going to take and I'm going to sliver cut a couple of strips off of here that are 1.5 inches. And so I'm just going to trim this, fold it in half, and I'm mixing regular quilting cottons with batiks, and that's okay to do. So I don't want you to feel like you can't do that. You can. So I'm grabbing those. I always cut from the edge and then towards the fold, because that leaves bigger scraps that you can save for something else. I have a couple of these that are 1.5 inches, and these look like they're a little bit narrower. And then I might do a couple of these pieces as well. And so I'm just going to cut this in half so that I have pieces that are 1.5 inches right here. All right. So now that I have my strips, I'm going to freestyle this watermelon. And so if you've never freestyled pieced, please, I encourage you to try to do freestyle stuff. It's just liberating. So instead of stressing out of like, oh my goodness, everything has to be perfection. No, it doesn't. You can just do whatever you want, whenever you want to. And there's nobody there to hold you back and make you do something different. So you're the boss of your quilt. So I'm going to take a 6.5 inch piece. And I flung the other one out of the way. Isn't that lovely? All right, so I'm going to take this piece here, 6.5 inches. Doesn't have to be that long, but it could be shorter. It could be 5.5 inches, because my watermelon is going to be fitting on a 6.5 inch square. I'm going to go about 5.5 inches is good. And I'm going to start with my center. Fold it again, pretty sides to the outside. Now that I see my crease, I'm going to take and I'm going to lay this piece right here at an angle, going at a diagonal, and it's going from the center. I'm lining it up with the center right there, and I'm going this way, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch across that edge. So yes, how many people say yes to the pillow covers? Who you want me to make pillow covers? I have a neutral thread in my sewing machine. I always sew with 100% cotton thread. And I use a leader and an ender. You know, some of us have so many quilts or have made so many quilts that small projects can be a lot of fun. All right, so I'm going to take my finger, because when you're doing this, you actually don't even need an iron. You can just use your fingernail and your thumb. And so now I have that. I'm going to lay the other side right here. So I'm going from a lighter pink to a darker pink, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to overlap by 1/4 of an inch. And I want to go this way. And I'm going to sew, same thing. I'm going to overlap up here at the tip by at least 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to come this way so that I don't lose my point on that watermelon. And you could put it at an angle just as long as over here you also overlap by 1/4 of an inch. All right, so let's go over here so you can watch my crazy improv piecing. If you've never made pieces like this and you're just kind of improving it, you should give it a try. I know sometimes people feel nervous about doing this kind of work, but it's actually kind of liberating. Play with your scraps. Oops. And look, I just stitched it the wrong direction because I'm talking and working at the same time. So play with your scraps. And don't be afraid to get out that seam ripper and try again. It's okay. There you go. You know, I'm kind of a crazy person when it comes to rethreading my machine, right? You guys are going to be like, come on, Yvonne, this is ridiculous with you and that threader, but it is what it is. All right. Yes, I do lick my thread. How many of you guys are thread lickers? Let me turn on that light. The eyes are not what they used to be. There we go. First try with the light on. Imagine that. All right. So let me go over here and fix it because I started talking and I lost it, but that's okay. So what you want is for this to flip over this way, right? And so I should have been sewing from this side down. See, and instead this is going to flip that way. So when you're angly challenged like me, you have to always kind of visualize it before you start getting so happy, because then you're just going to have to seam rip it. But that's okay, because what I'm trying to do is a pieced watermelon. And I hope you guys are enjoying your winter. I don't know what it is about winter, but it's so cozy. And I love winter months, but then I start daydreaming about summer. About halfway through December, I start daydreaming of summer. Maybe it's the shorter days. Okay, so back over here. And now I'm going to sew from here down 1/4 of an inch away, overlap by 1/4 of an inch, and make sure that I end at least this way. And now I'm going to go back and do it again, okay? Yes, the process is always tricky which way to fold it. So I just needed to go the opposite direction. And this is why I'm angly challenged. But when I slow down and I do it, then it's fine. But when I'm in a big rush, it never works out for me. All right, so I'm going to use the left side of my presser foot, and I'm just going to line it up so that it overlaps at least 1/4 of an inch down here. And then I'm just going to sew straight through that. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, Jack the Ripper is there for a reason. He's a lovely friend. Jack the Ripper is the guy that helps me to stay on track and not waste a ton of fabric. So as long as you've got Jack the Ripper handy, you're fine. All right, so let's see what we've got here. So now that I've got this, and I'm going to take my fingernail and just run it down that edge and run it over here, I have a little spot on this side and a little spot on this side that I'm going to cover. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little skinny red, and I'm going to kind of come at an angle like this, but not too much of an angle. And what I'm trying to build is a set of strips so that I can then trim my little triangle shape for my watermelon. And so this is just because I wanted to get fancy. You don't have to do all of this. You could literally just cut a single piece of fabric and call it a day, and that's that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and add a strip. Let me see. Is that going to be enough? It might be. And then maybe if I do this one, that might be enough. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make like a little shape that looks like a pie, right? And I want my reds to be lighter and darker. And like I said, you don't have to do all this weird fancy stuff that I'm trying to do. I'm just doing that because I want my block to be a little bit more interesting. And I'm just going to trim the excess. So Deanne says, my seam ripper's named Kermit because he likes to rip it, rip it, rip it. You know what? That's super cute. Mine's Jack the Ripper, the seam ripper. And I've stabbed myself a few times, so Jack the Ripper left a bloody mess in my sewing room on more than one occasion. So I try not to stab myself with Jack the Ripper, but he can be dangerous. All right. So I have that here, and let me see how wide. And actually, that is actually wide enough. So if I didn't want to add more pieces, I don't have to. So what I'm going to do here, and you can do the same with yours, is I'm just going to trim this and use it as a template. So you don't have to draw anything or get fancy, but I'm just going to use this as my template. And now I'm going to lay this on top, and then I just need to make sure that I have at least this much fabric, and I do. So when I lay that on here, I can do just that. So I'm going to lay that little point right there, and I'm going to use my ruler, and I'm going to trim this, but first I'm going to draw on some of this paper because I'm going to make, as you guys can see, I've been playing around with this. I'm going to make a little tiny bit bigger than what I need. So I'm just going to take and lightly trace about 1/4 of an inch extra, not that I need it, outside. I'm just going to kind of eyeball that, and I'm going to make myself a triangle shape out of fusible web that I'm going to stick on the back of that shape. And I want that so I can put it in the middle. All right. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just having fun with this. And so I'm going to take this now. I'm going to give this little guy a good press. And you're probably thinking, what is this woman doing? Look, there's the lost piece. Thank goodness I need 2 of those. And I'm going to press it super flat. And then on the back side, I'm going to lay this guy down. And I'm going to make sure he's lined up with that top. And because I don't want to make a mess on my, I don't want to make a mess on my thing, I'm going to use a little piece of paper. So any paper that you have in your sewing room, if you ever feel like, oh my goodness, I need something, just make sure that you're covering. Let me see, is that too much of a tip? No, that's perfect. So I have a seam line, and I'm going to line that tip up with that seam line. And then I'm just going to take my iron and press it down the center. And I'm going to heat up my iron some more. And I just need to make sure that that glue gets in these seams. It doesn't have to be everywhere. There just needs to be enough that it holds it onto my spot. And then I'm just going to take this, and I'm going to use my scissor to cut off the bulkiness and trim the excess. And this is all kind of organic freestyle. Like, don't panic about this kind of stuff. Literally, don't panic. Because nobody knows what this is supposed to look like but you. The people that you give these quilts to are not going to be sitting there inspecting your every stitch, wondering, did you follow the pattern exactly? They're not going to care. All right, so there it is. and I'm just going to give it another bit of a press for about 15 seconds, just until that glue becomes completely transparent. All right, so I'm going to let that cool down for a second, and I'm going to look for some green. I have a little bit of green, and so what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to trace. I'm going to slip this up under here, and I'm going to trace a couple of pieces of fusible web. And whenever I trace fusible web for something, it needs to be an overlap. So for here, I'm going to trim like this, and I'm going to draw a little bit wider than what I'm going to need, maybe by like a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch wider. And then I'm going to do another one for the dark green rind, and I'm going to move him over. And the reason I'm moving him over so I'm not wasting so much fabric and so much fusible web, because this stuff is not cheap. I don't know if you guys have noticed a spike, and this is light green, a spike in prices, but things have gotten very expensive. And so we got to save every penny for these little projects. All right, so now that I have two, this is dark green, Dr. Green, and Lieutenant Green. And I'm going to cut these out and put them on fabric. And they just have to be skinny enough for me to do that. I'm going to give these a tiny bit of a seam allowance. And I'm going to snip that, and I'm going to put it on 2 pieces of green fabric. And if you notice, I'm using a bunch of scraps. I have a darker green and a lighter green. And so I'm going to go ahead and take dark green and light green. You guys are gaining insight into my subconscious tonight. And so you look at that. You see how it's fairly even on both sides? I like how that turned out. All right, so I'm building a little bit of a collage, right? But you're going to want to put this on the wrong side of the fabric always. Mine, it doesn't matter because it's a batik. But if you like to play around in your sewing room, this is kind of a fun thing to do, especially if you have a lot of scraps. You can make all kinds of little treats. So light green goes here, dark green goes there, and I'm going to get my iron and I'm going to press both of those pieces. And for my fusible web, it says about 15 seconds. And that's about all it takes before it becomes transparent. If you press it too much, you kill the glue, and that's never a good thing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and trim this just outside the line to make it a tiny bit wider, and then we're going to overlap it, and you won't even notice. And then when we're all done, we're going to trim this whole thing. I'm just going to leave a little border outside of my lines. And the reason I'm doing that is to just give me some insurance to make sure that it's the correct size. You can always trim it down, but you can never make it bigger. And so to ensure that it's the correct size, I'm just going to give myself some wiggle room. All right, move these 2 things out of the way. And then trim that top. And I'm ready to assemble this collaged watermelon. I will do an entire session on collages because I love collages, but we'll do an entire session later on collages. All right, so now that I have this, I'm going to have to put this light green right here. I'm going to run it up until it meets the edge, and then I'm going to take this one and it's going to go across the bottom. And see how it's a little bit narrow? It doesn't matter because I'm going to prune that off. All right, so let's take this paper. I'm going to leave this paper here because I am going to be adding this watermelon like that and like that to the bottom of this. And then I need to just measure. As long as it's close to the same size as this one, then we're in business. So I'm going to give myself about that much room. All right. So I'm going to peel this one off first, and then the next one. And if you're having trouble peeling these off, just keep a pin handy, score that, and pull it off. Easy peasy. A pin or your fingernail. All right, I'm going to lay this here just so that I have it as my template. And this is going to come down just a tiny bit. I'm going to trim this one to size. And if you notice, I'm just kind of eyeballing this whole thing, and I'm okay with it. I'm giving myself the freedom to just do whatever I want to do without too much stress. All right. All right, and that's how I want this to fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the tip of my iron, and I have not removed, I'm going to use a pin, a nice big needle here, and I'm just going to tease that into place. And then I'm going to use my hot iron to just fuse both of these in this spot, just the top of them, just with the tip, and then I'm going to trim this bottom off, because I don't want that bottom to peek out. And so I'm going to spread this downward, and I'm going to remove the excess. So I'm just going to come in here and remove that extra, because what I don't want it is to show. All right, so that is peeked under there. And so now this entire thing is ready for me to prune the sides like this, and ready to adhere. And I love how she turned out. She's just a fun little watermelon. And so you can make these pieces out of little teeny tiny leftover scraps. And then I just need a 6.5 inch square, because that's what I need for the middle of all of these. And let me just measure to make sure that she is a 6.5 inch square. And she's not. This is my 7-inch piece. And my 6.5 inch squares are over here. So she'll go in the middle of my 6.5 inch square. Let me double check. Yep, 6.5 by 6.5. So that one's it. And I just have to put this little watermelon in the middle. So same as I did before, I'm just going to take that off with a pin, just kind of score it. Remove all of that. It has enough glue on the back and enough glue on these edges that this entire little piece of watermelon is going to sit like that. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I use my fingers and just kind of make sure that it's not too high and not too low. And then I'm going to give it a press. Heat up your iron. If you're not ready to press or you're not ready to commit, you can always just take a couple of pins, pin that on there, and continue your process until you have all of your stuff. But that's it. This is how I'm making my little improv watermelon. I want a little piece of watermelon inside there. And like I said, if you just want to use polka dotted fabric, if you have red fabric with black polka dots, you can use that instead of trying all of this. All right, so my iron's hot again. Give it a press. And look at, there it is. Nice and stuck. So this one is ready for me to sew. All right, for those of you who did not join me or did not understand, I had a lot of questions about the 4 at a time flying geese. So let me just recap what we did. So in all of these cases, I'm going to take this 6.5 inch block here, and I'm going to be sewing it into the center of a star. And so in order to make those stars, I'm going to do the 4 at a time flying geese method. And so I just have a 7.5 inch square, and then I have these pieces, which are 4 1/4. And I've drawn some lines on a few of those. I need 1, 2, 3, 4. These are fuchsia, because fuchsia is the color that I am using for Joy. And I'm going to take and I'm going to line this up. I was like, what was I cutting for? And I'm going to line it up this way. So you're putting it overlapping. It's going to overlap by about 1 inch in the middle. You're going to pin on both sides of this side and the other side as well. And the reason you pin is just to keep these from wiggling around. I usually put about 4 pins. Some people sew this without pinning, but if this gets off kilter, then you're in trouble. You can always put pins the opposite direction as well, if that will help yours to keep it moving around. All right. So line that up straight and make sure you've pinned it so that it stays that way. Wrestling with pins is not my favorite, but it does the job. All right. So there we have it. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch on either side of that. And so let me show you really fast how to do that. And you're going to be shocked just how quickly we do these. It's my flying geese method that's my favorite. And so I'm just going to sew it with a scant 1/4 inch, but it doesn't really matter. You could do an exact 1/4 or a scant 1/4 for this method. Now, if you're using the measurements I put in that chart, that's the exact method. But I always give you guys a little bit of extra in case you are new and your 1/4 of an inch is not perfect. All right, you're going to pull the thread, release the flywheel, and then just pull it. And then when you have this triangle tip, I always lay it down and I hold my thread out like this with my finger, because what that does is that ensures that triangle doesn't get chewed up by my feed dogs. If you get little bird's nests underneath your feed dogs when you first start triangles, you might need to be pulling that thread or use a leader ender. All right. This is literally the fastest method to make flying geese. So if you're making a quilt that has a bazillion of these, this is your method to go to. All right. Trim the middle of those where I drew that line. Just like this. I find it easier to use a pair of scissors than to whip out my rotary cutter. All right. Set that seam. Anytime that you're sewing, it's a good idea to set that seam, because what that does is it takes any distortion out of your block and it shrinks it back. All right. And then we're going to go towards the dark with your finger. This is a bias, so you're going to want to be careful not to abuse it too much. And just let your iron do the work. So whenever I have a bias, I just push the iron carefully downward and then glide it along the seam. And that just prevents your block from being distorted. And when you lay it, you can tell that it's not all wonky and distorted. If your blocks are looking wonky and distorted, you're either using too much pressure or you're using steam. I do not use steam when I'm working with a bias, because that will definitely distort your seams. All right, so who out there is a steamer? Some people love to use steam, other people only use a hot dry iron, but I think it's a personal preference. If you've ever watched some of these other online quilters, some of them use a ton of steam and some of them just use hot dry iron. All right, so now that I have it just like this, I'm going to take the other piece and I'll lay it in the opposite direction. There is quite a bit of overlap, about 1 inch, because that is how I wanted to do it, so that I have about 1/8 of an inch of wiggle room or trimming space. And so that should be a 1 inch square right there, and that looks like it is. And this is how we're going to do all of these. So this is the last episode in which I will model this skill, because in the other ones, we're going to work on different skills. And so I'm going to be working on applique skills. I'm going to show you some needle turning skills. We're going to be doing a variety of different skills. All right. So only hot iron, dry only. Some people says I do both. It just depends on the task, right? Like some tasks I think require a steam, a nice shot of steam, but some are definitely a dry only. This one is a dry only because you're working with a bias. Okay. Some threads got tangled in there and I just move them out of the way. Whenever I have something like this where I have to turn around, I typically will sew right off the object and then sew onto the next one. And that reduces the likelihood that I'm going to get a bird nest underneath my needle plate. And then I'm going to come straight down the opposite side. And I like to do assembly line sewing. Anytime that I can assembly line sew, I try to get it done that way. But if you're assembly line sewing, make sure that you're sewing those pieces correctly, because if you're sewing them all wrong, there's nothing more tragic than to get 20 pieces into the quilt and realize you've sewn 20 pieces all incorrectly. So I always sew a test block and then I make notes like on a Post-it note and put them next to my machine. That way I'm doing each step and then coming back and double checking. All right, look at that. So fast. So fast. All right, I'm going to come in. I'm going to cut the line, that line that I drew in between both of those. Just going to cut right through that line. And I will have 4 flying geese in the blink of an eye. This is so much faster than the stitch and flip method, where you take a square. I was going to do it that way, but I thought, nope, we're going to do it the most efficient way possible. All right, so now that I have these, I like to press into the goose fabric and press away from the goose. So by that I mean the sky fabric has the seams going towards the dark. And when you do that, you get the most accurate trim of your goose or geese. What's the correct term for plural? I guess it is geese, right? One goose, multiple geese. And so I'm just taking it and I'm laying it like this. And like I said, the sizes that I gave you, which are 7.5 inches for the big one and 4 1/4 for the little ones, gives you extra wiggle room. Veronica says, I do a sample block with random scraps and then add the block to the orphan block bin. You know what I'm going to start doing? I'm going to start making a sample block with scraps and then making that my quilt label. I thought about doing that. So if it's just a small block, you can just make it your quilt label, especially if it has stuff in the middle. All right, look at that. So now that I've done it and I've pressed it from the goose outward and I have nice straight 45-degree lines on all of these, then I just have to trim it. And the best way to trim these is to start by trimming the goose side. So we know that I have to leave 1/4 of an inch right here. And so the best thing for me to do is to take my ruler, and this has a 45-degree line, and I can line that line up right there with the edge of that goose and then line up the 1/4 of an inch line right here with this part. And what that does is it keeps my goose or my geese nice and straight, and that prevents me from having geese that are crooked. And so that's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim that. And this is just to make it more efficient for you to assembly line sew. And you're going to line that 45-degree line up with that edge and slide that over until you have that 1/4 of an inch, right, is right there. Because what you don't want is to cut too deep into that 1/4 of an inch. So you need that nice generous 1/4 of an inch there so you don't chop it off. I could leave a little bit more, but I don't think I will. And I'm just going to, again, use that 45-degree line to make sure that I am lining that up and it's centered. And look at how quickly we're trimming these. Like I said, I made them bigger than what you needed so that when you make these, they're going to be the correct size and they're all going to match. All right. Now, you have this and it's a tiny bit wider than what you need. So you're just going to have to use your 6.5-inch square ruler. If you have a 6.5-inch square, I always keep one in my sewing room because I use so many jelly roll projects use a 6.5-inch square. And so it has a white line in the middle. And you can just line it up just like this and make sure that that is centered. That white line in the middle. And then you're going to just trim it off, line it up along that edge and trim off a little sliver on this side and a sliver on this side. Now, I know the point of the no-waste flying geese is to not have to trim. However, like I said, I made mine a little bit bigger than what I wanted and to be the finished size because I don't want to have geese that are the wrong size. So there I have it. I'm trimming it on this side. I'm going to rotate my mat. This is a handy dandy rotating mat, and then I'm going to line it up with the 3.5-inch line and the bullseye and the mark. And I will end up with a goose that's the perfect size. And just like that. Make sure that I have trimmed it. Correctly. Line up that bullseye. Oops, hang on. Line it up right there. And see how I'm lining up that bullseye? This is 1, 2, 3.5. Ooh, friends, I almost cut it the wrong size. There we go. I was losing my mind. I thought, why am I cutting that much off? Okay, read your rulers correctly. Mine reads this way to 3.5. I almost chopped it off at 3. It was looking kind of weird to me. So always double check, and that's it. That piece is now 3.5 by 6.5, and I can get them all the same. So always double check your ruler that you're cutting it correctly, because all of a sudden you could be doing what I just pulled and ruin your whole sewing project. All right, so there it is, 3.5. Line it up along this 45. Trimmy trim these two sides. Leave my ruler exactly where it's at. Rotate it around and then trim this side. Oof. How many of you guys have chopped a block the incorrect size because you read your ruler upside down? I think it's pretty common. It's pretty common when you first get started. Yeah, I know that the way that I'm doing it is fussy, but I will get 4 perfect flying geese, and I would much rather do it this way than using some other method that then causes you to have geese that are not exactly correct. And so there we have it. I'm lining it up. I'm using the 45-degree line on this side. Just let me slide it up so you can see. I'm using 45-degree line on here. I'm running the 3.5-inch here, and I'm using the center of my ruler. It has a little bullseye, and it should land right there. And by using the same method, sometimes I label my ruler. Then it makes it so that I'm not making boo-boos when I'm trimming. There we go. Look at that. And so then all of these pieces are going to end up exactly the same. So if I line them up, they all end up identical. And that's what I want. I want all of these pieces to be identical. And then what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to sew these On the outside, I'm going to add 3.5-inch squares to fill in the spots, and then this block will look just like this one. And so that's what I want for each of these blocks is I'm going to have a fruit in the middle and a star on the outside. Now, if you don't want to do it this way, if you don't want an applique, a big fruit in the middle, you could put a log cabin and then just put a 6.5-inch log cabin in the middle in the colorway of these blocks, and then you can just use the words in the panels that are long if you wanted to do it that way. But don't feel like you have to do it my way. This is just one way. And so this is it, friends. This is how we're going to be working these blocks. So if you want to start working on your star points in all of the colors, you can go to the website. Yeah, I love the applique. I think it's turning out really nice. So you can go to the Fruit of the Spirit website. So I'm going to open up my page so you can see it. I'm going to share my desktop. You're going to go to the Fruit of the Spirit website. And if you want to work ahead, you're going to click on Fruit of the Spirit. You're going to go to the handout that I shared the very first night, and you're going to look at all of these. And so these are the stars that we're going to be making, 2 of each, right? So we have 2 that represent love, 2 that represent joy, 2 that represent peace. And so this is what we have, 2 that represent patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And so if you want to jump ahead and start working on those, you can do that. And the fruit that we're going to be using is strawberry, watermelon, cherry, pomegranate, pineapple, orange, apple, banana, and starfruit. So if you want to start looking at those things and working ahead, you can do that because we're going to be working on different applique techniques, especially once we get to like pomegranate and once we get to cherry. I'm going to show you a couple of different applique techniques. But that's it, friends. I hope that you are joining us. These blocks are going to be so pretty. And I think this quilt is going to turn out cute and fresh. All right, friends, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will be so happy to help you answer any questions that you have. I love working with fabrics that are bright and cheerful. So please put a little joy in your life and go play with some fabric. And I will be working on the rest of the supplies that go with this, the rest of the things, and I will post them on the website. And if you're interested in doing the pillow of the month next year, please let me know so that I can start drafting pillows. We'll start it in February. And I'm going to be doing one pillow cover every single month. So if you think we should do that, let me know, and I will do a bunch of different pillow covers for us to work on. All right, everybody, you guys have a wonderful week. I will see you guys shortly. Next Wednesday, I'm doing little mini stockings. I'm going to show you how to add piping to stockings if you want to get fancy. But I love this project, and I think it's going to be fun. You guys have a great, wonderful week. Please share this with your friends. We are so close to 30,000 subscribers. If you will please share this channel with 3 friends, or if you have not liked us or subscribed, please do. That way we can bump up our viewership and we can continue providing free content to everybody that comes to this website. All right, everybody, you guys have a wonderful, wonderful week. If I don't see you next week, then have a wonderful week, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks for the next block, which is peace. And you're going to like that one. All right, everybody, you guys have a good one.